The signs of civilization that we see emerging are not the beginnings of civilization. They're a restarting of civilization that had existed before the cataclysm.
New DNA analysis just explained who the Aztecs really were. And what geneticists found encoded in ancient bones is so disturbing that one lead researcher physically walked away from her own results. Every male bloodline erased, not reduced, not blended, erased. Every single one. That's what scientists discovered when they sequenced ancient DNA from the civilizations that existed before the Aztecs. The Olmec, the Maya, the Toltec, the builders of Teotihuacan. Their Y chromosomes are gone, completely deleted from the genetic record. But here's what makes this terrifying. The women survived, the mothers lived, the fathers vanished. For decades, Graham Hancock argued that entire civilizations were violently wiped from history, and that mainstream archaeology was burying the evidence. Scientists called him a fraud. They laughed at his theories on national television. But when the DNA results came back from labs at Harvard, Stanford, and Mexico's top research universities, they confirmed exactly what Hancock had been saying all along. The Aztecs didn't just conquer an empire, they replaced the erased fathers of an entire continent. The impossible discovery. In 2015, Dr. Pontus Skoglund at Harvard was running genetic analysis on ancient Amazonian remains. Standard procedure, routine sequencing. His lab focuses on understanding fundamental aspects of the human past through large-scale genomic science, the kind of careful, methodical work that wins awards and fills academic journals. Nothing about that Tuesday suggested it would upend everything. When his algorithm returned results, Dr. Skoglund leaned forward in his chair. Then he stood up. Then he sat back down. The DNA contained genetic markers from Aboriginal Australians, from the opposite side of the planet. He closed the program, reopened it, ran it again. Same results. He called a colleague into the lab and ran it a third time with someone watching over his shoulder. The signal remained. And that was impossible according to every model conventional archaeology had ever produced. Every textbook said humans entered the Americas roughly 15,000 years ago through a single land bridge from Siberia. One migration, one source population, clean and simple. This was the origin story taught in every university, repeated in every documentary, displayed in every museum exhibit across the Western world. No mysteries, no complications, case closed. But this Australasian signal predated the Siberian migration entirely. It came from across the Pacific Ocean. It shouldn't exist. It couldn't exist. And yet there it was, staring back from the screen. Here's the catch. The signal doesn't appear uniformly across the Americas. It's concentrated in the Amazon basin while nearly absent elsewhere. If this were simply an ancient migration that predated the Siberians, you'd expect to find traces of it everywhere, spread evenly across North America, Central America, and South America. Instead, it's clustered, isolated, hidden in some of the most remote populations on Earth, while almost completely absent from surrounding regions. That pattern tells a deeply disturbing story. A story of populations that were once widespread, but were systematically replaced, absorbed, eliminated over thousands of years. Wave after wave of newcomers arrived, mixed with existing populations, and erased those who came before. Layer after layer of genetic history, bulldozed and paved over. The only survivors were groups isolated enough, deep enough in the Amazon, that the waves of replacement never fully reached them. Graham Hancock had argued this exact pattern for years. He'd written books about it, done interviews, stood on stages and told rooms full of skeptics that the conventional narrative was wrong, that catastrophic population replacements had occurred repeatedly throughout the Americas. Scientists dismissed him as a pseudoscientist. They mocked his theories publicly, called his work dangerous misinformation. But now the DNA was backing him up, and nowhere was this disturbing pattern more evident than in Mesoamerica, the land that would eventually become the Aztec Empire. But what researchers found there makes the Amazonian signal look like a footnote. The erased fathers. When Dr. Maria Avila Arcos at Mexico's National Autonomous University analyzed Y chromosome data from ancient Mesoamerican remains, she wasn't expecting what came next. Nobody was. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in her lab. Her coffee sat untouched, going cold. When the results populated on screen, she pushed back from her desk and stood up. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she ran the analysis again, then a third time, each run hoping the data would change, that she'd find the error, the contamination, the explanation. The results didn't change, they couldn't. The male lineages of the Olmec, the builders of Teotihuacan, the early Maya, the Toltec, all of them had vanished from the genetic record, not diminished over time through natural drift. Gone, every single one. The Y chromosomes that should have passed from father to son for hundreds of generations had simply stopped, terminated, like bloodlines cut with a surgical knife. Like someone had gone through the genetic record with a black marker and deleted entire family trees stretching back centuries. Now, here's where it gets really unsettling. The female lineages persisted. Across every collapse, every catastrophe, every civilization-ending event, maternal DNA survived. Women were absorbed into new populations, married into new communities, carried their genetic heritage forward through daughters and granddaughters. Generation after generation, the mothers endured. The men, the fathers, the warriors, the priests, the kings, deleted from existence. And this wasn't gradual blending over centuries. That's what you'd expect from normal population, mixing, slow, shifts, gentle curves on a graph. Two groups meet, intermarry, and over 10 or 20 generations, their genetic profiles merge into something new. That's how population genetics usually works. It's quiet, it's peaceful, it's boring. This was none of those things. The breaks were sharp, sudden. They coincided exactly with moments of civilizational collapse, like someone flipping a switch. One generation, a thriving paternal lineage with deep roots stretching back centuries. The next generation, completely different men. Strangers, as if the original fathers had never existed at all. Think about that for a second. This is precisely the kind of pattern Graham Hancock described when he talked about civilizations being violently erased and replaced. Not slow cultural evolution, catastrophic replacement. And now the genetics were proving it had happened not once, but over and over across the entire region. If you want to keep uncovering the secrets buried in ancient DNA, subscribe now, because what comes next in this story is where everything gets truly terrifying. The Teotihuacan massacre. One example stands above all others. Teotihuacan. At its peak around 450 AD, this city housed over 125,000 people, rivaling Rome in both population and grandeur. Its enormous pyramids still stand today. The Pyramid of the Sun rising over 200 feet above the valley floor, visible for miles in every direction, silent witnesses to something terrible. Its influence extended across all of Mesoamerica. Trade goods bearing its symbols have been found hundreds of kilometers away. Artists in distant cities copied its style. Rulers in foreign lands claimed its authority to legitimize their own power. This wasn't just a city, it was the center of the known world. The Aztecs, arriving centuries later, were so overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the ruins that they believed only gods could have built them. They named it the place where men became gods. But here's the deal. Around 550 AD, Teotihuacan didn't just decline. It was destroyed with a level of violence that still shocks archaeologists today. Temples burned so hot, the stone cracked. Blood soaked into plaza stones so deeply that chemical traces remain 15 centuries later. Monuments weren't just toppled, they were deliberately defaced with a fury suggesting not conquest, but hatred, personal hatred. Statues smashed, sacred spaces desecrated, entire districts reduced to ash and rubble. And within a single generation, different men were walking through those same streets. Different Y chromosomes, different fathers, different bloodlines entirely. The genetic signature didn't shift gradually the way it would through trade or intermarriage. It changed almost overnight. Complete replacement. Dr. Andres Moreno Estrada at Mexico's National Laboratory of Genomics was presenting these findings at a conference when he paused mid-sentence. The slide behind him showed a timeline of Y chromosome replacements. The room went quiet. 200 researchers staring at a pattern none of them could explain away. He looked down at his notes, then back up at the audience. He described the data as watching a crime committed in genetic slow motion. Except, when you zoomed in on individual sites, it wasn't slow at all. It was instantaneous. One generation to the next. Complete erasure. Imagine an entire city's worth of fathers, brothers, and sons vanished, replaced by strangers who moved into their homes, worshipped in their temples, took their wives. The women remained. Their mitochondrial DNA shows unbroken continuity across the collapse. They survived. They endured. But their husbands, their fathers, their sons, replaced systematically, completely, and permanently. And get this? The Mesoamerican heartland shows this identical pattern everywhere researchers look. Maya sites reveal the same sharp Y chromosome breaks coinciding with the classic Maya collapse. Toltec genetic signatures vanish abruptly after their empire fell. Olmec paternal lineages disappear without a trace. Each civilization, separated by centuries, experienced the exact same fate. Pay attention to this next part. War explains some of it. Ancient armies killed men and took women as captives or wives. Over time, this erases Y chromosomes while maintaining maternal DNA. Conquerors become fathers. The conquered become genetic ghosts. But the scale of what happened across Mesoamerica, this wasn't ordinary warfare between neighboring cities. This was a continental pattern repeating like clockwork across millennia. Each civilizational collapse created a genetic vacuum. Each vacuum filled by newcomers who dominated until the next wave arrived and erased them too. A cycle of annihilation stretching back thousands of years. Exactly the kind of cycle Hancock had warned about. But wait until you hear who stepped into the final vacuum. The Aztec genetic conquest. The timing of the Aztec arrival looks almost too perfect to be coincidental. According to their own histories, the Mexica people wandered for generations before finding home. They claimed origin from a mythical northern place called Aztlan, a word that literally means place of whiteness or place of herons. Their god, Huitzilopochtli, commanded them to leave Aztlan and search for a specific sign, an eagle perched on a cactus devouring a snake. For nearly 200 years they wandered, fighting, serving as mercenaries for stronger groups, getting expelled from one territory after another. They were considered barbarians, outsiders. Nobody wanted them. They finally found their sign on a swampy island in Lake Texcoco in 1325 and founded Tenochtitlan. Some researchers now quietly ask an uncomfortable question. Was 2 centuries of wandering really aimless? Or were the Mexica waiting, deliberately or instinctively, for the right moment to settle? Here's the deal though. When the Aztecs arrived, they weren't walking into a competitive landscape of powerful civilizations. They were walking into a genetic graveyard. The region had been destabilized by centuries of violence and collapse. Male lineages of earlier civilizations had been shattered beyond recognition. Surviving populations were fragmented, their paternal ancestry broken and replaced multiple times over. The land was full of survivors, but survivors whose father lines had been cut, whose communities had been hollowed out, whose power structures had already been dismantled by previous waves of violence. Into this fractured landscape came the Aztecs, with something nobody else had anymore: intact Y chromosomes. Their male lines hadn't been shattered by conquest. They hadn't been absorbed and diluted over centuries of replacement. They arrived as a coherent genetic unit, fresh blood entering a land of broken bloodlines. And they moved fast, terrifyingly fast. Within 2 centuries, they built one of Earth's largest cities. Tenochtitlan was bigger than London or Paris at the time. Causeways stretched across water connecting the island city to the mainland. Aqueducts carried fresh water for miles. Floating gardens called chinampas fed hundreds of thousands. Massive pyramids dominated the skyline, their steps still stained from fresh sacrifices. When Spanish conquistadors first saw it rising from the lake in 1519, Bernal Diaz del Castillo wrote that soldiers asked whether the things they saw were not a dream. Now, here's where it gets really unsettling. As the Aztecs expanded, their male lineages spread across central Mexico like genetic wildfire. They married women from conquered populations, merging their Y chromosomes with the maternal lineages that had survived earlier collapses. Within just a few generations, Aztec paternal ancestry became dominant across their entire growing empire. This wasn't political conquest. This was biological replacement on a continental scale. Dr. Alexander Ioannidis at Stanford was reviewing the data from city-states that fell under Aztec control when he stopped scrolling and sat back in his chair. He called his research team into the room, pointed at the screen. The Y chromosome shifts following Aztec conquest were dramatic, sometimes a complete genetic overhaul occurring within a single generation. Local gene pools reorganized overnight. Women from conquered regions appearing in genetic samples from the Aztec heartland. Evidence of large-scale movement of female populations toward the center of the empire. One of his team members asked if the data could be wrong. Ioannidis shook his head. He said the pattern was unmistakable and unlike anything he'd seen at this scale in any population on Earth. And that's not even the crazy part. The Aztecs had a tool that made their genetic takeover even more efficient than brute military force: Nahuatl, the Aztec language. When the Spanish arrived, they were shocked at how widely Nahuatl was understood. Traders spoke it. Messengers carried it. Marketplaces from northern Mexico to Central America echoed with it, far beyond the reach of any Aztec army. Language travels with people. Wherever Nahuatl went, Aztec genes followed. Merchants, soldiers, administrators, priests. Each group carried their genetic heritage along with their vocabulary. DNA confirms this pattern. Regions connected by Nahuatl trade routes showed genetic mixing consistent with long-distance movement and intermarriage. The Aztecs weren't just conquering territory, they were building an empire of blood, extending their paternal ancestry across a continent whose original fathers had already been erased. Every major revelation in this story connects back to what Graham Hancock predicted. Populations replaced, evidence buried, the conventional narrative dangerously incomplete, but the final piece of this puzzle goes somewhere even Hancock didn't go. Beyond what anyone predicted. Here's the part that changes everything. The story doesn't start with the Aztecs. It doesn't even start with the Olmec. The Australasian signal that Dr. Skoglund found in 2015, the one that started this entire investigation, is ancient. Far older than any known Mesoamerican civilization. It represents contact or migration at the very dawn of human presence in the Americas, possibly 15,000 years ago or more. That means the pattern of genetic replacement wasn't something that emerged with organized warfare or complex civilizations. It was happening from the very beginning, before cities, before empires, before writing or agriculture or metallurgy. For at least 15,000 years, populations in the Americas were being rewritten. The genetic slate wiped partially clean, over and over, wave after wave of newcomers arriving, wave after wave of men being erased, long before the Olmec carved their first colossal head, long before the Maya plotted their first star chart, long before Teotihuacan's first stone was laid. The erasure was already ancient, already routine, already a pattern so deeply embedded in the history of two continents that it might as well have been a law of nature. Think about that for a second. Graham Hancock argued for decades that civilizations were erased from history, that the past is far more violent and strange than textbooks admit, that entire peoples vanished and were replaced while evidence was buried or ignored by mainstream archaeology. They called him crazy, called him a fraud, refused to take his theory seriously. The DNA proves entire bloodlines were erased systematically, repeatedly, across millennia, not metaphorically, literally. Genetic signatures of fathers and sons cut off and replaced over and over for thousands of years. The very pattern mainstream science said was impossible, exactly what Hancock predicted. But here's where this goes beyond even Hancock's claims. Dr. David Reich at Harvard was reviewing the complete dataset. Every ancient genome, every Y chromosome break, every maternal continuity line. When he went quiet in the middle of a lab meeting, his colleagues waited. He finally spoke. He said, "We're only beginning to understand the true violence embedded in human genetic history. Violence leaving its signature in every sample. Violence written into the blood of survivors. Violence that mainstream archaeology refused to see until the DNA made it impossible to ignore." Pay attention to this next part, because this is the question nobody is asking yet. The Aztecs were interrupted. Spanish arrival in 1519 ended their expansion, European diseases decimated their population, European weapons destroyed their military. European colonization dismantled their empire before they could complete their genetic conquest. But their genetic legacy survived. Millions of people today carry Aztec paternal ancestry, bloodlines that spread across Mesoamerica during their brief century of dominance. The Spanish burned their books, destroyed their temples, banned their religion, but they couldn't erase the DNA. Aztec Y chromosomes are still there, still dominant, still marking the genetic landscape of Mexico and Central America 500 years later. And here's the final question, the one that should genuinely unsettle you, the one even Hancock hasn't answered. If this cycle of paternal erasure and replacement has been repeating for 15,000 years across the Americas, and the Aztecs were just the latest iteration, then who were the first replacers? What population arrived at the very beginning and set this entire chain in motion? Because that original wave, the one that triggered 15 millennia of men disappearing and being overwritten, predates every civilization we have a name for. We have no texts from them, no oral histories that reach back far enough, no monuments, no art, no trace of who they were or where they came from. Only the faintest ghost of a genetic signal buried in isolated Amazonian populations, slowly being decoded by machines that didn't exist 10 years ago. The Aztecs replaced erased fathers, but someone erased those fathers first, and someone erased the ones before them, and before them. 15,000 years of men disappearing, women surviving, and new bloodlines writing themselves over the old. Over and over and over. A cycle so old it predates human memory itself. The DNA doesn't lie. It can't. And it's telling us that human history is far darker, far more violent, and far stranger than anyone, even Graham Hancock, was prepared to accept. We're just getting started pulling these genetic threads. Subscribe now because the investigation doesn't stop here. Next, we're looking at what ancient DNA revealed about the builders of the Egyptian pyramids. And what geneticists found buried in those bones has some researchers questioning everything we thought we knew about who really built them. You don't want to miss that one.